Hello, everyone. So I first want to thank all of you guys for taking time out of your day to attend Parker and I's community conversation about resource inequality and COVID-19's effect on resource inequality. So before we get started, I first want to let everyone who will be mainly speaking today give a little brief introduction about themselves. So I was thinking that as for introductions, I can start us off and then we can have Parker introduce himself. And then as for our guest speakers, we can go in the order from Trustee Sung to Mr. Ceniceros and then Mr. Dubose. So I'll start us off. So hello everyone, my name is Lauren. I'm a current senior attending James E. Taylor High School in Katy, Texas.
Hello, I'm Parker. Sorry for the unmute. I also am a senior attending Cinco Ranch High School, and we go to the same district.
Hello, I'm Ann Sung. I'm a trustee on the board of the Houston Independent School District. Thank you so much for having me here.
Hey everyone, my name is Marcus Ceniceros. I work with an organization called Leadership for Educational Equity, where we help educators become more civically engaged. I was also a former teacher, and I support One Houston, which is a community organizing group that Mr. Dubose might share a little bit more about right now.
How's it going, everyone? My name is Darren Dubose. I'm currently an educator. I work in the southwest side of Houston, so I'm super excited to teach kiddos every single day, as well as I co-lead one of our committees with One Houston, the school to prison pipeline work. I'm super excited just to be a part of the conversation this evening.
Thank you everyone for those great introductions. So before we get started, I first want to explain what the purpose of a community conversation is. And our goal is to help build a space by young people for young people to facilitate conversations around COVID-19 and its effects in the greater Houston area. And we hope to create a welcoming environment that connects audience and organizers to get excited to do work within Houston organizations and other community members. So as a little segue into our conversation today, I want to open up a little icebreaker question to anyone in the audience and also in the live. I just wanted to ask if any of you guys have ever felt a barrier between yourself and your classmates and for the adults, like your peers and your colleagues, due to a lack of opportunity. So to start us off a little bit, I feel like my experience, it's not on the extreme side, but it's like had a major effect on me last year, kind of. So I go to James E. Taylor High School in Katy, Texas, and I would say that my school is on a scale from, it's pretty privileged in a sense. And I was last year, because since I'm a senior now, last year it was junior year, so really stressful year, UT and all of that, preparing for college. And all of my friends around me, they were all affording these $1,000 tutors, like couple grand tutors for standardized testing prep, as well as just general in-school subjects. And because of that, it just became I just had a really toxic mentality because of that, because I felt like I couldn't be as successful as everyone else in my grade just because I wasn't able to obtain these resources. So is there anyone else who would like to share anything?
I can share. I'm thinking about, I'm originally from Alabama, and I grew up in a very, very small town where it was only about 2,000 people in the entire town. But I just remember my education was not the most rigorous when I look back, right? And so, like, we did not have all of the advanced type of courses or advanced classes that a lot of people around the state had access to. And I just remember not only in my undergrad experience, but my graduate experience, not being just so far behind in those classes of not even having those basic skills that people knew. And that meant that I just had to work twice as hard just to show up each and every day. So, yeah, and like the internship. So I just remember just feeling just saddened by just the opportunity of just not having just access to those things that people had access to.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with what you said because I actually was talking about this a little before because I feel like everyone's like definition of privilege is really relative to their experience. So like for you growing up in Alabama, that was like your definition of privilege, I guess. But I feel like, I don't know, what I was just trying to say is that privilege can be really subjective based on our experiences. But I saw that Mr. Ceniceros wanted to say something. You want to add it?
Oh, sure. Thanks. Yeah. No, I was just connecting with what Mr. Dubose was mentioning earlier. I grew up in El Paso, Texas, and I felt like I was really ready to go to college. I went to UT Austin, and I was super excited to start like my first day in an honors program there. And I left my first class in tears because like I had no idea how everyone else knew what they knew. Like I honestly like struggled with knowing like that is what a syllabus was. I was like, wait, I'm supposed to look at a paper that tells me what I was supposed to read already. Like I didn't know what that was, just because of the differences at my school. And at my school in high school, I did really well, right? And so I just remember having, like Mr. Dubose said, like working extreme, like double hard my first year in order to keep up, and that just really made me like it put me back like a lot further than what my classmates were able to do their first year of college. And for a lot of students, like I know coming from different schools and different places into like a central location, you really get to see what that inequity might have looked like in real life, and it impacts you a lot. It impacts your confidence a lot, I think.
Yeah, and then we also got a message in the chat from Ayana who said she also had a similar experience as me because her school is very like college ready and stuff like that. And I think I definitely understand that because it's not just my school that's really college ready. It's like specifically my grade. Everyone's like all about college and it's just really cutthroat. So it's like imposter syndrome is definitely a thing. Okay, so for time's sake, I think I'm going to pass it on to Parker to open us up about our topic today.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about education inequality in the first part, and then we're going to be talking about how COVID-19 affected education inequality. So we're gonna start with like the already established systems that might contribute to education inequality. And so the first one I have is, this is to like Trustee Sung, like from an outsider's perspective, like I don't really understand like what the magnet system is and like why it was created. So could you explain that for everyone?
Sure. So this predates actually my attendance in Houston ISD. So I'm a former student and a teacher in Houston ISD. I was a student in the 80s, which was after the magnet system was created. What I understand of the history is that previous to that, of course, Houston ISD, like many school districts, was segregated. And so so across the country, school districts were under order to desegregate. And the magnet system is the way that the leadership of Houston ISD at the time decided to do that, to bring together white students and Black students in Houston ISD.
So the magnet schools were designed to like promote racial integration. So has like HSD been successful in this regard, or maybe not successful, or are they on the way to achieving success?
That's a very good question. I happen to have with me a report which shows the distribution of HISD students by race and ethnicity. So, you know, we still have 100 schools in HISD where that are 80% or more Hispanic. We have 16 schools that are 80% or more African American. We also have a few schools, not many, but we do have some schools which have much higher proportions of white students than other districts. I think one difference now between when the magnet system was first implemented is that there are just fewer white students in HISD overall. It's less than 10% now of the district. Yeah.
So in the interest of time, I guess I have to shift it to the more private side, and that also would maybe contribute to inequality, but like the charter system school. So could you like to Mr. Dubose, can you explain like what exactly this charter system school is?
Yeah, absolutely. So currently I work for KIPP Texas, but there are many different charter school networks across the city of Houston. I know specifically I worked up in the Sky partnership up in Spring Branch. So we partnered with Spring Branch ISD doing some work up there. And so it was really fun because we were inside of the public school building. And so just imagine having two schools in one building, which was a lot of fun, but also a lot of challenges as well. But there are many different charter school networks across the city of Houston. I particularly work for KIPP Texas, but I also know a lot of people that work for Yes Prep and other charter school networks across the city.
Yeah, so I guess we have time. So is this system of, it seems like from my personal experience, like the charter schools and the magnet schools, they seem to be like much better schools. I'm not sure if that assumption is right, but it definitely seems like it by the students that come out of it. I'm constantly like impressed by them. They're way smarter than me. But so is this like system of magnet schools and charter schools, is it like meritocratic or how does it function?
Yeah, so for instance, KIPP Texas, we're a public charter school. So similar to a traditional ISD, we get majority of our funding from the state. And so right now it is a very interesting time because of the COVID and the opening of schools. So we have to follow TEA, whatever they send down to our school district. In terms of like the different of students, I think that takes me back to that last school that I mentioned inside of a public school building. So we shared that particular building. And what we saw was that we were looking or we work with the same students from the same community. And so I would argue and say that our students were not smarter than the same students. I think it was how we went about like our testing regime. We just made sure that we did things a little different. But I don't think that I don't think our students were, any different from those particular students because once we both shared the same resources and shared the same data, we saw that all students in that building could perform on that same level. And so I think it's really interesting because it was really fun because I used to have students in the hallway saying like, oh, we're better. And I'm like, how so? Like let's look at the data and let's be able to talk about it. And I think once we were able to, as a school, share the same things that work inside the classroom, share like effective practices, we saw that all students who left Landrum Middle Schools were successful. And it did not matter if they were KIPP, nor did it matter if they were, Landrum Middle School, that all students, if they have the same resources to that first questions, they can too be successful in the same way.
I'll jump in here unless Marcus wants to get in there. Okay. So I think, there's been there's been a history in the Houston ISD of where there's been a widespread point of view that is very similar to what you described, Parker, right? Which is that, you've got to get into a magnet school in Houston ISD in order for it to be a good school. And certainly we have some really tremendous schools that are magnet schools in Houston ISD, but I'll hold up as an example the two schools that I taught at in Houston ISD. So I taught at Lee High School, which is now Wisdom High School in Houston ISD. That's a neighborhood school very close to where I live. And the North Side used to be, well, now it's called North Side High School. And I guess these schools had small magnet programs, but they never really drew large numbers of students. They were not whole school magnets like you sometimes think of in Houston ISD, where every student is coming from somewhere else in the city. So these are both neighborhood schools, and both of the schools that I've taught at have sent students to Harvard University, my alma mater. So you don't have to go to a magnet school in order to get a good education and to to go to a great college. Now that said, it's taken some work to build more equity into the system. So we have had to look at, and we have in the 4 years I've been on the board, we have restructured funding for magnet schools to make it more fair across the school district. We have looked at, we are still in the process of looking at access to AP, IB, advanced programs across the school district. And it is personally very important to me that strong programs that prepare students for a variety of careers, for a variety of colleges, be available at every single school in HISD, that you don't have to get into a specialized magnet program in order to have access to those kinds of opportunities.
Hey, Parker, I'd love to answer. One, I'd just like to, Trustee Sung and Sung has done like a really has played a really important role in the HISD school board to ensure that all schools have what they need for kids. So I just want to point that out, that I think that's a big part of her work, and we have to support people like that who are ensuring that for kids. I want to go back to something that you mentioned, Parker, and you said like good schools or bad schools. And whenever I hear that, I think about that kind of being like coded language that we typically associate with race, because schools who have more students of color are oftentimes called bad schools, or we give up hope that kids who might be living in poverty or have different identities might not be able to do as well. And I think we do a really big disservice when we call a school a bad school, because what we know is that school probably hasn't been getting enough funding, or the teachers might not have the right amount of supports, or families could use other systems of support. In Houston in particular, housing is a big issue, the way that neighborhoods are, income levels from neighborhoods and support that the city has had. And so there's just all these different systems that are going into schools. And then at the end of the day, we say, oh, that's a bad school because enough kids didn't maybe pass a test or something like that. And charters and magnets and all these different areas, they're good intention to help kids, but the big thing is that not enough kids are doing well. And particularly that falls onto kids of color and kids in low-income communities. And so we have to all do our best to make sure that that's changing, that those inequities don't exist in that. And we do it in ways we see Trustee Sung doing it from a school board, or Mr. Dubose, who's a current classroom teacher. Those are all really important roles that we have to support in order for that to change.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's one of the things I didn't want to, make, I know charter schools and magnet schools, they are good schools, and there are plenty of good neighborhood schools. And I didn't want to try to say one school is better than other. I just was, I'm sorry. I think I had to turn it on to Laura now. We're running out of time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you say that you're going to turn it over to me?
Yes, Lauren's going to take us into how like COVID-19 affected education inequality.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. I'm a little tired right now. But, anyways, we did talk a lot about how resource inequality, how about just resource inequality in general and how COVID-19 affected that because we wanted to talk about how COVID-19, it basically created a wider gap people at different schools. Obviously, some families within a certain school aren't able to obtain the same amount of resources as others. So we want to discuss that, but for time's sake, we will jump over that. But we did discuss a lot of issues within like school systems due to resource inequality. And right now, I just want to focus on the future, right? And how we can change that in the future to hopefully alleviate the effects of resource inequality. So the first question, whoever wants to answer it, just say whatever you want. But I wanted to know how each of you guys are committed to combating inequality given your position in the education system. Since I know a bunch of you guys, you're both teachers and you're also a part of the board. And I just wanted to know if you guys have any advice on how we can fix this problem in our community.
I don't mind jumping in first. Um, I think I think I look at this as a three-prong approach, right? Like that there's multiple ways, but of course, I spend most of my hours teaching students and closing gaps that way by making sure that students can, handle the bar is really high for students. And when I think about this, I think about my story of self on just making sure that students have access to high quality teachers. And when I mean students, I mean underserved and low income students have access to the best teachers possible, just to make sure that they are equipped to be able to go off and do all of these things that I wasn't fortunate to do when I was in college. And so definitely making sure that the rigor is always high for students, but also too, what I think about, also think about the work that I do with One Houston, right? Like making sure that, students who look like me, right, who have the same background and, may have different challenges, don't get treated, less than, right? And that get treated fairly. And so making sure it was so interesting. I had a student the other day have a toy gun in the classroom, and it was, me having that background and working with the particular issue action team. I already had that knowledge about how to have that conversation, right? And so I think about, if this particular student was in someone else's class, like what would have happened? But not only, just being that person in the classroom, how do we mirror and make sure that our code of conducts look the way and present and protect Black boys and, brown boys and making sure that they're protected. And so I think that, doing the first work of making sure that the lessons are good and making sure that students have access to that. But then the second way of just making sure that we are just fighting these systems to make sure that these systems support our kids and to make sure that they have equitable access, not only inside, but also outside the classroom as well.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to, because yesterday Parker sent me a video that you made about how you're helping your students integrate into online working. And I just wanted to praise you for that because I enjoy how I really appreciate how you try to create a connection with your students beyond just being a teacher and teaching them all of these different equations or sentence structures and stuff like that. Like you actually try to see the student as a person and to provide them both emotional and educational support, because I feel like in my experiences, some of my teachers, it's just they don't provide me with enough support emotionally for the class. And I feel like sometimes there's just that barrier. Like you don't, it's just hard to open up to your teachers, if you know what I mean.
Lauren, you talked about the importance of emotional support, and Mr. Dubose talked about supporting his students inside the classroom and outside the classroom. I agree. I think that's really important. And there are things you can do from a school system perspective to build in those supports. So we can make sure that we have mental health counselors. We can make sure that we have wraparound supports for a school, so that if a student is coming to school hungry, or they're having trouble, cleaning their uniform, we don't let those things be barriers to a kid who's working hard, maybe working a job also to support their family, before they even get to school in the morning. And we are supporting our students, meeting them where they are, and supporting them to be able to come to school and to have their basic needs met, their mental health needs met, so they can focus on the academics. So that's been really important. So my commitment as a trustee, in 2017, we wrote policy to make sure that Houston ISD would become a community school system with a real focus on wraparound supports for our students, because our district overall is 80% low income. We know COVID is only magnifying the challenges that our families face. The other thing really goes to what Mr. Dubose started with, which is making sure that our students get access to a challenging, rigorous education, right? So, you're really supportive. You've got to be really supportive of students, right? Times are hard for everybody right now, and inequalities are only getting worse, right? But then also, don't limit expectations of kids based on, stereotypes, based on, zip code. Really, give students opportunities. And so we have programs in Houston ISD which bring students to tour colleges. Just as soon as this pandemic goes away, we'll start doing that again. We have programs that will connect students with mentors who will help them with a college application. Maybe you're the first in your family to apply to college, right? But here's a mentor who believes in you, who's going to help you figure that out, or to read a syllabus and see what that's like. So, massive supports, great opportunities. And I would say the third thing, which, both of our, my fellow panelists are really good at, is empowering students. And this, I go back to my time as a community organizer here too. Our students and our communities and families are only stronger when we build leaders, right? So when our students have voice, when that's heard in the system, then our schools are stronger, our communities are stronger, our whole country is stronger. And that's something we're right now working on policy, updating our policy framework for Houston ISD. And I'm making sure student voice is in there this time around, because I kind of wished it last time, but what you don't write into policy, what you don't build systems around to monitor, doesn't happen. So this time we're gonna get it right.
Yeah, I liked how the policy that you're trying to make to integrate students' voices into the district. But I just came up with a little question, because I know you're talking about how you're trying to establish a program to help kids receive a mentorship to help with applying to colleges and everything. And I was just curious, how are you going to encourage people within encourage the administration within high schools to I guess you could say advertise for it within the school? Because I know personally with my high school, this year they tried creating a Wellness Wednesday to help provide students at my school with emotional support, but it honestly kind of backfired, since not a lot of the administration was pushing for it. So, and also teachers and administration weren't telling kids enough information about it. So even if a student needed that extra emotional and support for school, they weren't able to get it, since teachers weren't advertising about it.
That's a great question. I think students are often the best ambassadors. So for some of the programs in Houston ISD, you have people who have participated in those programs, like Emerge, which is one of our college readiness programs in Houston ISD. You know, the best advertisement for that is when a student who's in college comes back and is speaking to a classroom about their experience. They're like, I was right there, you know, in your seats, right? And I wasn't sure I could find the money for college, and I didn't know about these, like, you know, recommendation letters I had to do, but like, this is how I figured it out, right? When you can see someone who looks like you, right, who is, you know, in college, and who is, you know, gotten that first job offer, like, wow, right? So that's one way to do it. And then just from a systems perspective, we have like a database. We have a system that actually tracks teacher referrals to our to wraparound resources. And so actually that kind of tracking helps us see, like, hey, there's a school where there aren't a lot of referrals happening. And then we can encourage teachers there to be better aware of the resources.
Okay, thank you. And then I know you mentioned how students are honestly like the best ambassadors for these types of programs. So I thought that was like a perfect little segment to our next question, which is how we can get young people involved in addressing educational inequality, especially during these circumstances of online learning. So if anyone wants to answer that, feel free to answer.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can jump in. And first, Lauren, I just want to say, like, thanks for being really vulnerable in your questions about how you're doing. I think you and Parker are doing an awesome job by moderating this. And this is like a great example of how students can be at the center of this work and like asking questions of someone who's like ran for office and like, you know, and really having the time to have those answers be heard by others. I think that it's important that students find a place to build their own power, because you're able to, your opinion should matter to teachers and your opinion should matter to the principals. And if they don't, then you have to work on figuring out how to make it happen. And there's a lot of really great ways to learn how to do like community organizing work, or just advocating for yourself. Like as a student, we work with students as young as like third graders to think about what's going on in their classrooms. And it really just starts by asking them questions. This one third grade classroom, actually, their school didn't allow them to talk at lunchtime. It was a silent lunchtime for like 20 minutes every day, no matter what. And the third graders were like, hey, we know why you made us have silent lunch. It's because this one day we were really bad. And like, and you got mad at us and it's been a month and like, we want that to change. And they made agreements with their principals. They said, what if we did these types of things? Can we earn our like lunch back, right? And they negotiated with their principal in like such an important way. So any age of a student can do that. And groups like this having space to do that is really great. I'll invite any of you if you want to. One Houston has a junior board now where students in middle school through high school can join and learn about community organizing. And so if anyone wants to do that in a more formal way, we meet virtually on Zoom like this and help students figure out problems. And so, yeah, Mr. Dubose is really great at doing that type of work as well. But that's what I would say, is just find your power and figure out how to use it at your school.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for saying that, because I think power is very important, since I feel like as a student within like this huge system, there's like sometimes where you kind of feel powerless and like you can't change anything within the school. Like I know amongst my friends, we all have these issues within the district, but we're just like, oh, like we're so small, we can't change anything within the district. So I like how you said that. But Trustee Sung had something to say. So.
That's a great question. So there are a number of organizations like One Houston that can teach students how to make sure their voice is heard if there aren't already systems in place for that. And in Houston ISD, some of our schools work with Mi Familia Vota or with OCA Greater Houston. There's Community Voices for Public Education, a number of different organizations that deliberately try to empower young people and teach them the tools to have their voices heard. Listen for what their concerns are, and then help them to build their own agenda, right? I think that's so important. I think that it's also important for leaders and adults to, if you say you're serious about student voice, then make sure that you're planning space for that to be heard. If there's a major decision to be made that's going to affect, so let's say 200,000 students in Houston ISD, right? Then like what is your mechanism for listening to students themselves about what they value and what's important to them in their own education? And so I mentioned that right now Houston ISD is going through the process of updating our governance platform, kind of our core policies that set priorities in the district. And one thing I've asked is, so what's our plan for hearing from students? I want to hear that. So that's something I'm making sure that we're doing in that. And then something I've proposed within the framework itself is that, in all of our policy work, we are deliberate in having structures for listening to students. So, that's something that you can actually advocate for. There are school districts in California where there is a student seat on that school board. I don't know of one in Texas that does it that way, but there is kind of by design in California, at least in parts of the state, like a student seat. So there is always a student that's maybe they don't vote on everything, but there's always a student to voice student concerns when adults are making decisions about students. So these are things that you could advocate for. We could advocate for here in Texas as well.
So I want to just ask, because I go to KDISD, and KDISD is, like Lauren said, pretty privileged school. And I was talking about this issue with one of my friends, and they were like, who cares? Like, I go to a pretty good school. I have the advantage. Why should I care about lifting other people up? Because we're all trying to get into college. So like, what would you say to those like super cynical people that are like, education equality is good because I'm benefiting from it? Like, how do we make them care about this issue?
Was that? I'm always happy to take questions, but I'm also happy to make space for other people. Was that directed at me, Parker?
No, to anyone. Sorry, I didn't say.
Well, sure. Okay. Well, I'm unmuted, so I'll speak. I think it's helpful to create spaces where people from different walks of life, are together, right? And so the friend that you're talking about, sounds like somebody who maybe hasn't been around kids who, live on the other side of the highway, or who live, in another part of town, or maybe who might even be at the same school, right? But struggling. And I've always found it helpful to bring together spaces where people can listen to each other, right? Everybody has, the same voice here. I want to hear from you, and you, and you, and you. What are your concerns? What are your hopes? And I think when you're in that kind of space, you find both that you're a shared humanity, like you find similarities in what people's hopes are for themselves. But then you can also hear about the inequalities, right? And then it becomes harder to defend, the systems that might privilege you, when you hear about like, hey, there's somebody with the same hopes and dreams I have, but they don't have, like, how can I defend, right? That I'm getting, two, I'm getting, 2 servings here, and they've got half a serving. So that might be a way to do it.
Yeah, I just want to jump off of Trustee Sung and just saying like, the empathy, right? Like how do we teach that to folks, right? And it makes me think about the activity, the race activity, where there was a white football coach and he had all of these different players out, right? And it was like step if you had this, or a step back if you had this, right? And I'm wondering like, how can y'all as students, right, provide that space where students can come together and like be able to do some type of activity where you are like you can like notice those different stories, right? Because it is a little different, right? Like when I see a friend next to me stepping across the line and I had no idea, right? Like maybe I care a little bit more now, right? Now that I know X student, just about this issue, and I can like just understand and resonate more. And so I think like just creating those spaces, right, where empathy can happen, where those activities can happen, where you can, just be on the forefront with just showing and just providing that space for our students.
Yeah, I definitely agreed with the points that Mr. Dubose as well as Trustee Sung and Mr. Ceniceros made, because I especially agreed with the part that kind of related to knowing, like becoming aware that other people in your surroundings are not as fortunate as you, I guess you could say. Because I remember in my Spanish class, for example, like my teacher, he always talks about how there's some students in his class that go up to him after class or something like that. And then they just open up to them and they talk about like how they're homeless and everything. And then I remember when he told my class that, I was extremely surprised because, to be honest, I was kind of stuck in my own bubble with all of my friends who are so privileged that I didn't realize that some people like directly in my area are struggling to like just survive in general. So thanks for making those points. Yeah, but I think that is all the topics that we wanted to discuss. So do any of the guest speakers have any last words that they want to tell the audience? Sorry.
Well, I'd like to thank our moderators. You guys have done an amazing job, really well done. And I'd encourage those participating, those listening, pay attention to what this group is doing. It's let me make sure I get your name right, Shift Press, because youth voice is what's going to make a difference in our communities. You guys have the ideas for the future. You guys have the heart and the empathy, I think, to imagine a different, more just world. And I'm excited to see where you guys lead us. If I or I'm sure my fellow panelists can support in any way, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm really encouraged by this conversation. And I'm going to be following you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just echo thank you and let us know if there's support to have. And I just want to these are really hard questions for us to answer as adults. They're hard questions for students to answer as kids, but they're important for each of us to do, right? And saying things like, I might have more privilege than somebody else is an important thing to learn about. Understanding how racism has impacted our lives or how inequity impacts our lives in school. That's really important. So I encourage you to keep tackling those questions with confidence, and it's okay to say those words because those things exist, and we have to be able to figure out how to live together in an important way that people aren't being left behind. And so yeah, thanks for the conversation, and keep asking these questions.
Okay, so I think we are good. So just to end things off, I just wanted to thank everyone who tuned in to today's community conversation. And if you want to hear more conversations like this, then make sure you follow Shift Press at Shift Press on virtually all social media platforms. So until next week's conversation, I hope to see everyone else later.